Some people confuse elegance with arrogance. They think that difficult language is a sign of intelligence and that money can buy respect. But life loves to turn things around when you least expect it. And that's exactly what happened at that fancy dinner where a millionaire, accustomed to applause, tried to humiliate someone and left humiliated without anyone having to raise their voice. She was just a waitress, at least in his eyes. Her face was serene, her clothes simple, her posture firm. But behind that good evening was something he never imagined he'd encounter: folksy wisdom, courage, and a fluency in French that dismantled all the pride embedded in her designer jacket. A single sentence, delivered with elegance and firmness, silenced the entire table. Because when the truth comes from the heart, it needs no audience. This isn't just a story of revenge. It's a story of recognition, of how a seemingly invisible woman became, with a single answer, a mirror for all who've ever been underestimated. If you've ever felt ignored, diminished, or disbelieved, stay until the end. Because this story isn't just moving, it's instructive. It was one of those dinners where the price of the dish is more important than the taste. The room was packed with business people, politicians, and influencers, all vying for attention between toasts and selfies. At the center of the most sought-after table sat Hector Brando, heir to a billion-dollar construction company, famous for his inflated ego and unfortunate one-liners. And it was there, amid expensive glasses and forced laughter, that he posed the question that would start it all. "Do you even know the name of the wine you're serving?" she said loudly, looking at the waitress as if staring at the floor. The group around her laughed heartily, but she didn't. Marina, discreet and serene, simply arranged the bottle on the tray, looked the millionaire in the eye, and replied with impeccable pronunciation, "Chateau Petrus 2014. Cheers, monsieur." And she walked away without looking back. The previously noisy room fell into an awkward silence. Hector held his glass suspended in midair, unsure whether to toast, laugh, or apologize. The sentence he'd uttered to belittle someone came back like a slap from a glove, only in French. Marina didn't need to raise her voice or use irony. Her strength lay in her quiet dignity, her command of the language, her control of the situation. It was a moving sentence, not for what it said, but for what it revealed. She knew who she was. He, not so much. From that moment on, no one could treat Marina as just an employee. There was something in her demeanor that defied the social script of the elite at the table. The simple witness, who served dishes without attracting attention, was now the center of a moment no one would forget. And Hector, who had always been the protagonist of the evenings, felt the ground tremble beneath his feet. For the first time, it wasn't his name that dominated the room, it was hers. Hector couldn't get that scene out of his head. In the days that followed, he opened the restaurant's Instagram, searched for her name in the comments, even tried discreetly asking the manager for information. But Marina seemed a mystery. No social media, no trace. This bothered him deeply. How could someone so remarkable disappear like that? The millionaire, accustomed to having everything, now wanted something he couldn't simply buy. He began returning to the restaurant frequently, but this time alone, without guests, without arrogance. He watched from a distance, hoping to see her again. When Marina appeared, he wasn't sure whether to greet her or simply admire her. It was as if, for the first time, he was being confronted by something greater than his own ego. The truth in the heart of a woman who cared nothing for pleasing anyone, only for being herself. On his third visit, Hector summoned courage. He arrived with a small book wrapped in plain paper, The Little Prince, in French. He waited until the end of the day, and seeing her leaving through the back door, approached her cautiously. "I read that book when I was a child. I didn't understand a thing. But now, after what you said, I reread a passage and thought of you." It was the first time he'd said anything without trying to impress. He just wanted to get closer. Marina arched her eyebrow in surprise. She hadn't expected kindness, much less sensitivity. She took the book, thanked him, and simply said, The aviator also learned from silence, monsieur, and she continued on her way with the calm steps of someone in no rush to trust. Heitor stood still, holding the emptiness, but with something different inside him, the beginnings of genuine curiosity. For the first time, perhaps, a gesture of hers wasn't directed at him. Heitor began to frequent the restaurant quietly. He sat at more discreet tables, ordered simple dishes, and sometimes didn't even eat. He simply observed Marina from afar, trying to understand how such a serene woman could make him so uneasy. He didn't try to strike up a conversation or force meetings. He gradually learned that some presences are worth more than 1,000 words, and that respect begins with silence. Marina noticed. She noticed the looks, the restrained gestures, the almost timid effort of someone who had never had to wait for anything. She remained focused on her studies, her demanding shifts, her real life. But something in her began to stir. Maybe it was the fact that he was there, insistent without intruding. Or maybe it was the desire to believe that even the arrogant can learn. What mattered was that finally, they were learning to walk in step. One rainy night, Marina finished her shift exhausted. As she exited the restaurant side, she ran into Heitor, holding 2 coffees in thermal cups. "I brought them with milk. Like last time." She hesitated, but accepted. They sat on a nearby bench under a canopy. They talked about books, about childhood, about things they didn't usually tell anyone. It was a simple conversation, but full of small truths. It was there that Marina spoke about her grandmother, her life in the countryside, her double shifts to pay for college. And Heitor, for the first time, didn't try to console or minimize. He just listened. The emotion in the real-life courtroom came from listening without judging. Marina saw that behind the man in the tie, there was someone striving to be better, and he understood that achievement isn't about winning, it's about being willing to learn from those we least expect. After that night, Heitor began to change small things. He traded his luxury car for regular transportation within a few days, just to understand what it was like to live without tinted windows and leather seats. He began to truly study French, not with private tutors, but with free videos and used books. For the first time, the mansion's heir began to build something that wasn't inherited: consciousness. Meanwhile, Marina watched. She could recognize effort from afar. She'd seen rich people feign humility just to win. But there was something different about Heitor. He didn't show off what he did, he just did it. He read slowly, jotted down phrases in notebooks, and even started attending poetry readings and book clubs. It was there, in the details, that Marina saw what truly mattered. Overcoming difficulties without a diploma came from those who had the courage to unlearn in order to learn again. For a week, Heitor disappeared. No visits to the restaurant, no messages, no sign. Marina missed him, not out of dependence, but because of the absence of someone who was becoming a constant presence. It was then that she found a note inside a book he had left for her days before. "I want to learn to live in your world, not in a hurry, but with truth." And that silence gained a voice. She understood that sometimes growing requires distance. Heitor wasn't running away. He was rebuilding himself. And while the noisy crowd tried to impress with flowers and ready-made phrases, he chose the harder path, that of time, of listening, of silent courage. Marina, who had learned to protect herself from easy promises, realized that perhaps something rare was born there, someone willing to learn more than to teach. The following week, Marina found a plain envelope on the counter of her locker at the restaurant. No brand name, no gold ribbons, just her handwritten name. Inside, 2 tickets to a piano recital at the Municipal Theatre and a note: "It's not to impress you, it's to share what I'm also learning to hear." It was a delicate, unpretentious gesture. No ostentation. She considered refusing. She'd seen plenty of wealthy men try to buy feelings with luxury, but something about that invitation was different. It was almost a request for permission. And Marina knew, when someone gives up their own stage to sit next to you in the audience, perhaps they're truly learning to listen. She accepted, not for the theatre, but for the honest attempt to connect without having to shine alone. The recital was simple and beautiful. Heitor arrived on time, wearing a carefully pressed blue shirt and a restrained smile. Marina was serene as always, but there was something different in the air. It wasn't a mood of conquest, nor of immediate romance. It was simply two worlds sharing the same silence, listening to notes that spoke what words couldn't yet say. After the concert, they walked to a 24-hour bakery and shared a toasted bread and hot chocolate. No promises, no elaborate plans, just conversations about childhood books and longing. Heitor understood that true love doesn't have a script. It reveals itself in everyday life. And Marina felt that perhaps for the first time, she was in the presence of someone who didn't want to charm her, just wanted to stay. A few days later, Heitor invited her to dinner at his apartment. He said he'd prepare everything himself. Marina accepted with some suspicion, imagining an evening full of excess and pretension. But when she arrived, she found the table set with paper napkins, a risotto that looked more like soup, and a host in a plain t-shirt and a crooked apron. For the first time, he seemed normal. They dined amid laughter and minor culinary disasters, and it was there, amid improvised pots and pans, that Marina saw something rare. Truth. No frills, no script. Just a man trying to be human, and that touched her. Because she'd met many who wanted to impress, but few who allowed themselves to make mistakes. In that unpretentious mistake, more confidence was born than in any perfect dinner. Heitor began to change on the inside, and it soon showed on the outside. He abandoned empty meetings, reduced commitments inherited from his father's company, and began dedicating time to himself. He reopened the old piano in the house, which he hadn't played since he was 14, and resumed studying French, this time with his own notes, pronunciation videos, and scribbled dictionaries. He wanted to understand, not just repeat, Marina noticed, unhurried, without expectations. She observed his pace and compared it with what she'd seen in others. But there was a difference. It wasn't an attempt at conquest, it was construction. And that made sense, because true change doesn't require applause, it requires consistency. With each new gesture, Heitor ceased to be the man she'd met that night and became someone she could perhaps trust. One rainy night, Marina left work early. The subway was out of service, the buses were late. Instead of waiting, she took another route, and without much thought went to Heitor's building. The doorman already recognized her. She went upstairs in silence, her heart racing. When the door opened, he was in a sweatshirt, a book on his lap, and a cup of tea in his hand. Surprised, he smiled as if rediscovering something he hadn't known he was waiting for. Marina entered, took off her coat and sat on the living room floor, as if it were the most natural place in the world. They spoke briefly. He offered tea and she accepted. And it was in this unscripted reunion that they understood. No event, formal invitation, or catchy phrase was needed. The connection was there, in the pauses, in the glances, in the fact that, even in silence, they both knew this was already a new beginning. Heitor went to the small wine cellar he had recently set up. He chose a simple bottle, no imported label, no pretense. He poured 2 glasses and returned to the living room. Marina raised hers with that same firm look from the first night, only now softer. He smiled and said, "This time I know the name of the wine." And she replied without irony, "But that's not what matters." They toasted, not to the drink, not to the occasion, but to what they had built, with stumbles, pauses, and presence. It was a discreet, intimate toast, a gesture of someone who has already understood that certain connections don't need pomp, only truth. And in that moment, between 2 simple sips, 2 such different worlds found something rare, a meeting point that no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. That same night, sitting on the living room floor, Marina told him she'd received an internship offer at a small publisher of translated books. The pay was modest, but her heart leapt at the opportunity. Hector listened silently, his eyes shining. Then he confessed he was thinking of opening a bookstore cafe, a place where people could chat without having to appear important. These weren't grandiose plans. They were real, dreams filled with the scent of coffee, the sound of pages turning, and the silence of people listening to each other. Marina felt that there, a kind of partnership could exist that wouldn't suffocate, each with their own path, but with the same direction. Heitor, in turn, understood that sharing a dream isn't just about telling, it's about rooting for the other person's too. And there, between books and plans, life finally seemed to make sense. Heitor walked to the piano in the corner of the room. He sat down, took a deep breath, and began to play. His hands hesitated. A few notes fell flat, but he didn't stop. Marina, leaning against the balcony door, watched in silence. It wasn't the melody that moved her. It was the gesture. It was the man who had once arrogantly tried to belittle her, now there, exposing himself, making mistakes, learning unhurriedly. When he finished, he turned to her and said, "It wasn't perfect," and Marina replied with a small smile, "Thank goodness." She sat down beside him and placed her hand over his. In that moment, there was no formal forgiveness, no memorized apology. There was presence, and presence, when sincere, heals more than any excuse. Because sometimes the greatest lesson in life is knowing how to touch someone even when they're off-key. In the following days, nothing drastically changed, and perhaps that was the most beautiful thing. Marina continued her routine, her studies, her shifts. Heitor continued figuring out how to fit into a world where status meant nothing. There were no promises, oaths, or labels, but there was care, listening, and presence. It was a feeling that didn't scream, but lingered. Marina knew how to recognize love that tries to buy space. She'd experienced it before, but with Heitor, it was different. He didn't offer expensive gifts. He offered scribbled books, perfectly prepared coffees, notes with phrases he'd misspelled, but he'd tried. And there, in the simplicity of the attempts, she understood, true love doesn't impress. It builds itself, slowly, stumbling, but with truth in the heart. They weren't living a fairy tale. There was no perfect soundtrack, no miraculous endings, but there was something rarer, a desire to endure. Through mistakes, adjustments, and discoveries, Marina wasn't expecting a hero, just someone who would walk alongside, respect the rhythm, and understand the silence. And Heitor finally understood that love isn't a victory, it's a daily construction. Sometimes they shared a book on the couch. Other times they simply gazed at the city from the balcony in silence. They weren't seeking perfection, they sought presence. And there, among stacked books, simple dishes, and hesitant music, they discovered something many rich people will never find: the peace of a love that doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. It just continues to be a choice, every day. What about you? Have you ever stopped to think how many times you've judged someone by their appearance, their position, or their way of speaking? Sometimes the greatest intelligence lies in silence. The greatest strength lies in vulnerability, and the most powerful words don't come from the mouths of those who have the most, but from those who hold the most truth in their hearts. This story is for those who believe that love can't be bought, it's built, that humility isn't weakness, that everyone, even with setbacks, deserves to be seen for who they truly are, not for what they have. And if this touched your heart, I invite you to join our channel. Subscribe now, activate the bell, and leave your like if you believe the world needs more stories like this, of courage, overcoming, and humanity. And comment below, which phrase from this story would you take to life? Let's talk in the comments.